Hello and welcome to Mediation Works. This is another of our segments where we're focusing on disputes in family matters. And I'm Wendy Lakusta. I have with me here my colleague Sharon Sutherland. And today we're happy to welcome Jereme Brooks. And we asked Jereme to join us because he has a real specialization and a lot of experience working with youth.
Wow.
And so we want to talk about that today. We want to talk about how best to involve youth in mediation and other collaborative processes.
Yeah.
And Jereme, I'd like to start off on that point because when we talked getting ready for this film, you said that there's a difference between including and involving youth in mediation. So how do you see that difference?
Well, I think it's the difference between including and involving. You can include a Labrador Retriever in a mediation.
Okay.
You know, it's a Chihuahua, whatever dog you want. It doesn't mean that they're going to be helpful to the process. It doesn't mean that you're really going to be able to discern, you know, what that dog really wants because their voice isn't going to be there, and it's not going to be there in a meaningful way that can be interpreted. Mm-hmm. When you actually involve youth in mediation, and by youth, it's a really big window. I mean, I think it's one of those things where we know when kids are no longer kids. I think we understand when children are no longer in that I can't tell what I want, I don't know what I want kind of thing, and their voice really begins to develop.
Yeah.
I also think we know when kids are no longer in any sort of adolescent role and they're adults.
Yeah, right.
Right. So when I say youth, it may well be children that are actually quite a young age. I mean, I typically bring voices in as early as I can. And it's based on capacity. It's not based on any sort of chronology. And I think the Family Law Act, probably more so than any of the other legalities that we deal with, I think that really compels us.
Yeah.
Because it's all about the best interest, and how are you going to be able to determine what that is from anything other than an academic kind of perspective without their voice?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And kids have different maturity levels, and they have different life experiences, and even how many siblings they have could influence where they're at. Right?
Well, whether or not they're the good ones.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe just explain some of the benefits of involving them, and then we'll get into some more specifics.
Sure. Well, I think that, the biggest benefit is if they're there.
Yeah.
And if they're part of it, and if they're not just a token, like you didn't just bring them there as window dressing,
right? Then
I think that you've got a shot of being able to actually determine whether or not they're going to follow through with the plan, what they want. It's great to have a plan, and plans are wonderful, and plans are great, and we all have them, and they're awesome. That doesn't mean you have an agreement.
Okay.
An agreement is entirely different. It's if I say, hey, we're going to go, dive in the ocean, it'll be great, we'll get some clams, that's a great plan unless nobody wants to do it.
Yeah. Right.
And
so it's the buy-in factor that you're talking about. Yeah. And we talk about the buy-in for adults all the time, and we work so hard.
Yeah.
But there's this sort of tokenism with children. It's sort of like we're going to get the buy-in of the adults to make this plan happen for the kids.
Well, and a 15-year-old or 7-year-old for that matter can blow up a bus really, really quick.
Yeah.
If they don't want to do it, they'll just go wet noodle, and it ain't happening. I mean, it's like trying to get a kid, into bed. If they don't want to go, you're going to drag them kicking and screaming. Now, try and think about that in terms of whether it's an access agreement or parenting time or anything like that. Kid don't want to go.
Yeah.
Well, even if you make them go, what are you doing down the road? How much counseling is that one going to take?
Yeah.
It's a tough gig. You need their involvement.
So in order to get their involvement, I guess when you're meeting a child or a youth, and when you're trying to talk to somebody and think about how you're going to do it, what kind of factors are you thinking about, Jereme, about just what am I taking into account into how am I going to engage them? How am I going to get them involved? What degree, what role?
Well, the first thing I do is I ask them, do you want me to talk to you like a kid or do you want me to talk to you like an adult?
Okay.
And
Cool.
And usually I say grown up, not adult. And I think that kind of determines if a kid says to me, "Look, I just want the kid version," I'm good with that, and it really creates that natural boundary. It creates that limitation that should be there of, "Look, I only want to know this."
Yep.
Right? And I still tell them the truth, and I still ask them for stuff, but I'm not digging. I'm not probing. If I ask a kid if they want me to talk to them like a grown up, and they say then I don't care how old they are.
Okay.
I'll still do it age appropriate. I'll still, make sure that I'm not, making things worse. But we'll just have a real talk, and I'll find out because the thing is they're not stupid. We discount them, but I love 5-year-old logic. You ask a 5-year-old what's wrong with daddy, and they'll tell you. They're not going to say, well, daddy peaked in high school and he never really actualized his potential. Daddy's he's not happy with his job. It's really one of those things being stuck in middle management. It's just not working for. No, they're going to say daddy drinks too much.
Yeah.
And that's I can work with that.
Yeah.
Give me that. Give me the actual issue. Don't give me the symptom. And don't rationalize it. And that's the beauty of 5-year-old logic. And that's what I go for. And if I can get that, regardless of the age, then that voice gets brought.
Okay.
Yeah. So are there times when you wouldn't include youth?
I've actually got a situation coming up, and the capacity is just not there, and it's based on developmental delays. I think that we talk about professional capacity and expert stuff. You hear people say, "Well, I'm not a child interviewer." Okay, I get that.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what really qualifies anybody to be a real child interviewer, except to say that regardless of your professional background or discipline, right? And it's a common sense thing. It's really one of those things where whether it's a child or an adult, and I think we really get tripped over on the chronology. Whether or not a person can talk for themselves. If you ask them how much is a Mars bar, and they can say that, and they know how much this is, and what's going to be the impact of this, and you can assess just really quickly.
Sure.
The magic banana question. Other people call it magic wands. I call it magic banana.
Okay.
What would you like? If you had a magic banana and you could do whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
If they're coming up with some decent answers, that's great.
They've got something to contribute. Yeah.
And there are going to be times where they either don't want to.
Yes.
Or they just can't. It's like tip of the tongue thing, but they're just not there. And I think it's unfair to place them in a role where they have to be, articulate in that situation. But it's really just your gut. When they can do it. When they can't.
Right. Yeah, and as mediators, we always look at do no harm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and capacity is one of those things that absolutely.
Well, and aside from capacity, what you were saying earlier, Jereme, about somebody who, talked to me like a kid, that's a pretty big statement that I actually want to be separate from things too, and might be a pretty big factor in saying different type of involvement with somebody who wants to get that.
And
that's about making a choice. Right?
Well, and I think it's any disenfranchised group.
Yeah.
It's not just youth, right? Like it's street types, people that come from, maybe immigrant backgrounds or whatever. When you don't have a voice, and that you don't have a voice, and it's apparent that you don't have a voice, it can be a really daunting task to get one.
Yeah.
So you have to be sensitive towards that. And, I think expectation is really where it's at. If I'm a person and somebody's just implicit in their thinking that I'm going to have a voice, then I get to choose whether or not I have one.
Right. Okay.
Right. And as long as I'm not, as the mediator, I'm not expecting them to contribute more than they want to, as long as I'm not expecting them to have some sort of really grounded opinion. They can be there as much as they want to be.
Yeah, and as long as there's not unrealistic expectations set and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
that makes sense.
in terms of tips to other professionals, one thing that you said when we talked earlier was part of being mindful is remembering back when we were kids, remembering how it was, because a lot of adults don't do that, especially as professionals. You get on a course where you're just status quo. You're doing things a certain way, and you forget to be mindful, right?
Well, I always go with the thing of, if it sucked for me, it's going to suck for them.
Right.
Like, I don't think the sucking stops.
No.
And I remember being in rooms where people were talking about me, and I mean, I'm the guy. I mean, I would go to the store with my mom, just simple things like that, and she'd say, "Well, why don't you get these jeans?" I don't want those jeans.
Right.
Well, no, we're going to get you. No, please don't get me these jeans. Don't spend the money on those jeans.
I'm not wearing those
going
jeans.
to wear those. And they never got worn.
Oh, I remember that feeling.
Yeah. Right? And it's the thing, like, seriously, I'm telling you what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
You can either acknowledge that or not. And I think far too often we, like, I work with kids all the time. I have no idea what it's like to be a kid. Not today. Not with everything that's there.
Things are different.
And if anything, what I do is I'm just me. And I think that's the biggest thing is it's about being authentic.
Yeah.
It's about being you. Like, I don't try and do that cool white rap thing. I don't want to relate. I don't want to hang out. I'm just going to talk to you.
They can see right through that.
Oh, yeah. But you know what? There's not one type of person that's better working with kids than another. It's just people that are themselves and they're genuinely themselves.
Yeah.
They work with kids really well because kids can spot it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're wrapping up because we're running out of time here. But one thing that you said that I thought was kind of funny, how you framed it, when we were talking earlier, was you talked about the idiot policy. So let's wrap up on that.
Okay.
Just talk about that.
So the idiot policy was developed in 1995 in response to a request from the director I was working for to create a behavioral policy for the youth center I was running.
Right.
And basically, kids, there were reports from the community that kids were being drunk or stoned. They were coming to the center, and this just couldn't happen. And I'm of a rather firm belief that the kids who need us the most make it the most difficult for us to serve them.
Right.
But that's still our job, and you can't assist somebody unless they're right next to you. You just don't have that influence. You don't have that impact. So instead of creating a behavior policy, which wouldn't have worked, I developed the idiot policy, which I think we now call harm reduction.
Probably.
But what it is as long as you're not an idiot, you can be there.
Right.
And drunk or stoned, if you're cool, you're cool. And sober or not, if
At
you're
least
an idiot, you're gone.
there. You're in a safe place.
Yeah, and and that's what I do with mediation. If you're an idiot, you're gone. I don't care who you are.
Okay.
But if you're cool, I don't care who you are.
So maybe we could apply this idiot policy to some of our mediations and involving children. Yeah,
It's probably the most straightforward ground rule you can ever set.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, it's worked for 20 years, so.
There you go.
Well, Jereme, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
it's
it's
great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Okay.